Finally, the day has come. I'm going to show you my Zpacks Solplex tent. I've had it with me for 30 nights of stay. It's been absolutely fantastic, super lightweight, super durable, and I really cannot wait to show you. Let's go. Hello fellow hiker and world traveller, Russ here, bringing you the best tips and inspiration for hiking around the world. I'm going to do a very quick setup of this tent now, but if you want to watch the full setup of this tent, then click the link up here in the corner and you can see how I set up this tent from start to finish. But for now I'm going to go over all of the features, all of the specs, all of the pros and the cons. Unfortunately, Zpacks do not sell this tent anymore, but it is very similar to their Plexamid tent, which they've just bought out. So this will help you make a very solid decision on whether you want to buy that or a similar tent of its class. Okay, so I'm going to quickly set this bad boy up just here. I'm here in the middle of nowhere. Hopefully the wind isn't too strong and it won't take me too long. So there she is, all set up. That took me between 5-6 minutes. Really easy once you get the hang of it. It's a beautiful yet very weird looking tent. It kind of looks like a spaceship has landed or something. There aren't many tents out there that look like this design. It's like origami. It's all very waterproof. It's all designed to be lightweight, quick to set up. It's made out of Dyneema composite fabric. I'll go over all of the specs and the features in just a second, but this design, it's bloody brilliant. Let's get a bit closer. As I said before, I've had this tent for about 30 nights worth of stay. I've taken it on the South Downs Way. I took it traveling with me. I've taken it on countless nights in Snowdonia that I've been training for the PCT in. It's been up in the Lake District with me. It's been camping in the garden with me. I've tested it out in fields. This thing has been my primary tent for about a year. Okay, so that's a quick overview of about where I've used it and how long I've been using it for. Oh, it's getting a bit sunny now. As I said before, Zpacks have stopped selling this tent. They now have replaced it with the Plexamid, which is their single pole equivalent. So in this video, I'm not going to go too heavy on the specs and the features and the pricing, but I'm just going to give you my experience of having a tent with this type of design and these kinds of materials. The most similar tent on the market that they have is the duplex. It's basically the two-person equivalent, but this tent is a single-person tent. Allow me to just give you a very brief overview of the pricing, just so I can show you exactly how much money I invested in this tent. Here we go, so I've got a little table here. So the actual tent cost $585. The 32-inch tent pole, which is made out of carbon fiber, cost me $15, and the 48-inch tent pole was $29, plus a £60 custom charge. That came to $674. That is one hell of a price tag for a single person tent, but I'll tell you exactly why it is so worth spending the money on a tent like this in just a second. I only take one trekking pole with me when I'm out hiking, so I wanted to use their actual carbon fiber tent poles. I'm using them right now. They're ultra lightweight, they're really strong, and they work perfectly and are fitted perfectly for this tent. Okay, let's very briefly talk about some of the specs. The tent itself weighs just 413 grams, which is 14.6 ounces, and it's basically what drew me to this particular tent in the first place, and while it was on sale, it was one of the lightest single-person tents on the market. I used to hike around with my OEX Fox 1, which was a fantastic tent for just 60 quid. I also have a review, so I will put a link to that just up here in the corner and in the description, but it was about 1.5 kilos. I couldn't take it around with me forever. It was too heavy to fit on top of my pack on the Y-strap. So I really wanted to switch to a much lighter tent. This tent sets up with a minimum of 6 stakes, whereas the Fox 1 set up with a minimum of 10, so much faster setup for a single person tent. And this tent is made out of Dyneema composite fabric, which makes all of this possible. When I first got this tent, I was using my Hyperlight mountain gear 2400, and when this thing is packed up, it packs down really small and it's able to fit in my pack as well as all of my other stuff for a 3-month travel stint around Southeast Asia, and it actually was able to fit in the overhead compartment while it was in my pack. So I had my sleep system, my clothes, all of my other amenities, plus an entire tent in a tiny little pack on the plane. Now I'm just going to quickly go over some of the features of this tent and give you a really good all-round look. It has a really huge rainbow front door that has 2 zippers on it, one on the inside, one on the outside. It has a bug mesh net that goes all the way over the front, over the back and around the perimeter of the tent. It has a bathtub floor so that no water is going to get in, and it actually raises the entire edges of the tent off the ground. As standard, it sets up with 8 stakes, but you can set it up with a minimum of 6. There are options to add an extra 2 guy lines. There are 2 little guy line loops on the sides, Can someone actually tell me what those are for, whether they're for extra guy lines or if you're supposed to loop something around them? I really don't know, I haven't tried that out yet. It sets up with 2 poles. You can either use the carbon fibre tent poles that Zpacks sell on their website, or you can use your own trekking poles, or mix them up. It's really up to you. It only has 1 door on the front, so it's not like the duplex where it has 2 entrances, but if it's just a single person tent, it really doesn't matter. It's got brightly coloured guy lines all the way around. It's got a little pouch at the front by the door so you can put a few of your need to reach items in. Another nifty little feature about this tent is it's got these 2 little line lock adjusters so you can actually expand out the walls of the tent, especially if you need to put your other guy lines on and it's flapping around a bit. It stops the condensation running off onto your head, and it just keeps the wall of the tent out of the way. It's got a really cool little hook on the front so that you can attach the storm door to it, and then you can pull both sides of the door around and actually make a completely enclosed tent. It also has these nice little attachment loops on the fronts of the doors so you can roll up the storm doors and make them completely secure and keep them there. So that's some of the specs and the features, but what I really want to talk about in this video is basically my experience with the tent, all of the weather conditions that I've had it in, how it's held up, and hopefully that will help you gauge exactly what kind of tent you want to buy. So how well did this tent put up in a rainstorm? Just make sure that you have a solid pitch. If this thing is even slightly flapping around when it's really windy, this thing is just going to be like that. So it's absolutely great in a storm. It will hold up to some solid wind, but just make sure you've got a really solid pitch. Make sure that those guy lines and those tent stakes are very well put down and very well tightened, because otherwise you will have a very flappy night and you won't get any sleep. In the wind, the high profile of the tent actually makes it a lot easier for the stakes to come out of the ground if you don't put them in properly. I actually had this out in a pretty bad rainstorm out in Snowdonia, so I'm gonna cut to some footage now and show you what that evening was like.
Okay, so it's been a very wet and windy night in my Zpacks Solplex. It's about 4:30 in the morning, and I just thought I'd give you guys a quick tour of my tent and let you know how the Zpacks Solplex fared up. It has been a really windy night, just constant rain, and to be honest, I'm really glad I came out tonight and really put this tent through its paces. So I'm gonna give you a quick tour and let you know what I thought of the evening. So there's like a little tiny bit of condensation on the walls of the tent, and that's about it. I had to get up in the middle of the night to get out and properly tighten this thing down because the whole thing was just flapping in the wind. Usually I don't do the sidewall guidelines up, but last night was so windy I just had to get out. And this tent is brilliant, but you really have to make sure you've got a really strong pitch, otherwise the thing's going to be flapping around all over the place. But ever since I've tightened it properly, it's fantastic. I've had a really good night's sleep. I did find that when the wind really picked up down there, that it would kind of spit some water up onto the fly net here, onto the bug net. I don't know if you can see, there's a few water droplets on there. No leaks for the most part, but I think where the seam seals at the top here are connected to this little tab, you can see a little drop of water, and you've got another one here. And that's the only water that's got into the tent all night. That's it. 400 and something grams this tent weighs, and I've been kept nice and dry and out of the elements all night, just minus having to get out to properly tighten it down. Once it's properly tight, jobs are good. So yeah, I mean, a bit noisy, very windy, but I'm dry and quite warm in my little sleeping quilt. Yeah, it's been not too bad a night.
So yeah, lots of flappiness, a few teeny tiny little leaks in the pole cups at the very top, but apart from that, that was basically it. Once I actually got out and properly tightened everything, there was no problem at all, and I ended up getting quite a good night's sleep in the end anyway. I have had this tent up and I've had a full night's sleep in it in some lighter rain without so much wind, and it's been absolutely fine. The water just runs straight off the DCF, and I didn't really experience any other issues like that. What I will advise with a tent like this is that you set up camp in an enclosed area if you can find one, or behind a wall or a rock or something like that, just to guard it from the wind. Not so much because it can't hold up to it, but mainly so that you get a good night's sleep. Another thing to consider with a single wall tent is condensation is always going to be an issue, especially if you're camped in lower ground near water sources. If there's any kind of fog or mist in the morning, all of that is going to condense on the inside of your tent. But the way that this tent is designed actually helps with that. On the inside of the tent, around the edges, it's got like a bug net, and all the condensation actually runs off the inside of the tent down the bug net, and it actually acts like a kind of gutter system. The only problem with that is if you're pretty tall, I'm 5'7", so I'm not very tall, but if your head or your feet are touching one of those walls, expect them to get wet in the night. With all that said, the bathtub floor in this tent actually doesn't get wet at all because all of the water runs out of the tent anyway. I've always had a dry night's sleep in this tent, except for that one time in that crazy storm in Snowdonia, and I didn't pitch the tent properly. The bathtub floor is such an incredible design feature. Unless it's a seriously driving rain, no rain is going to get up and over that bathtub floor. If the ground's quite wet and there's lots of damp on the floor, or if there's any running water, it's just going to run straight under the tent. All of the bottom is seam sealed. The DCF fabric is completely waterproof, so no water's going to get in there. I've had a very good experience with that. Compared to your normal style tents where it's just flat and then straight up, if there's any driving rain, it can actually come up and over the lip. Overall, the Zpacks Solplex is a very easy tent to set up. I think I've seen a few reviews on their brand new Plexamid tent, and it's a lot more complicated than this one. I wish they still had this tent on the market because it is just absolutely brilliant. The setup took me a few attempts to get really used to it, but in the end, after about 3 or 4 setups on my tub, I ended up getting really used to it. You literally just set up the 4 main ones on each of the corners, and then you leave them a bit loose, put the main pole up through the top, and then you put the other smaller pole through the back, and then you tighten both the front and the back guys, and then you end up having the 2 side ones for extra support in those windy conditions. It is very easy to set up indeed. I have a very important tip for you. This tent has a very, very delicate bug net that goes all the way around the edges, all the way around the front, and there's another bit of bug net on the back. And when you're putting the poles in, whether it be your trekking pole or one of the carbon fiber tent poles that you can buy on Zpacks, just make sure that your tent pole isn't sticking up into that bug net, because I've done this and I've made this really bad mistake. I put the back tent pole into the back tent pole cup, and I had the bug net actually lipped over the top of it, set it up fine, and then I put all my stuff in, and then I sat in the bathtub and smash. I put a hole straight through the bug net. I've actually managed to tape it up with a little bit of DCF tape that came with the tent for some minor repairs. It's not actually meant for the bug net, it's meant for the outer layer. But yeah, I was so gutted because that was just such a silly mistake to make, and it's so expensive. I could try to get it repaired, but it's not that big a hole, to be fair, but just so annoying because I've had this tent for ages, and literally about a month ago stuck the pole straight through it, sat down, and the bug mesh has a nice hole in it now. So yeah, watch out for that. Very easy mistake to make. Just make sure that the cups are completely clear before you put your poles in. Overall, this is the best tent that I've ever used. It's going to be my tent for a very long time to come. I really don't have any intentions on switching it out. I love how light and compact it is. I love how it fits into my backpack along with all of my other stuff. As long as you have a really solid pitch on it, it is fine in a rainstorm. As I'm only 5'7", I can sleep in there very comfortably with my pack inside the tent with me, right by my feet. It's not really touching the walls either, so yeah, very good indeed. I've heard mixed reviews about the Plexamid tent. It's very difficult to set up, and even after about 30 nights, I think Darwin on the trail said that he still has a little bit of an issue setting it up. There's a really huge aluminium or carbon fiber stay that actually, it's like a kind of rectangle that sits in the top of the tent, and that's what allows you to have just one tent pole with it. And to be honest with you, that's going to take up a lot of room, and it stops you actually being able to squish the pack down to a really small size in its stuff sack. So it's a little bit of a drawback for the Plexamid. I really wish that they still had this on the market because I think you would absolutely love it as well. As you can see, this tent looks so absolutely bizarre. It looks just like a spaceship has landed. You won't see many other tents out there on the market that look like this, that are so simple and so beautiful to look at. As you can see, I got this in the camo design just for a little bit more stealthiness, for while camping here in the UK. The print on it is kind of like broken leaves and sticks and twigs, and off in the distance you can't see that it's there. The stakes that I use are these really cheap OEX ones that I got from Go Outdoors. They're kind of like an arrow shape with a little hook on the end, and they actually come with a little pull cord on it so you can easily take it out of the ground if the ground's a little bit tough. Works really well with these. I used to use a more V-shaped style one, but on really hard ground they tend to bend and snap, so these ones have held up very well. DCF fabric is an absolutely fantastic material to be making ultra lightweight backpacking tents out of, because it's very light, of course, it's very strong, and it is extremely waterproof. I have a video all about what DCF is, and I will put a link up there in the description so you can check that out as well if you're new to Dyneema composite fabrics. I've heard of people doing 1, 2, maybe even 3 through hikes over 2,000 miles. These things are built to last, but things do not last forever, so eventually I will have to switch out to another tent. And if I were to buy another tent from Zpacks, it would probably be the Duplex. The Duplex is pretty much the same design and the same features as the Solplex, except it's just a lot bigger. And because I love this tent so much, I'd be willing to have the extra weight. Plus, it would be very good to have some extra space for that trade-off. So yeah, the Duplex would probably be my next tent. But I definitely will keep using the Solplex for a very long time to come, and it's going to be my tent for the PCT next year. So who would buy a Zpacks Solplex or a tent of a similar design? Someone who wants a tent like this is a hiker that wants to hike light and they want to hike fast. They're going to be looking to spend a little bit of extra cash for a very big investment in a tent that's going to take them on many hikes over many nights. They're happy with a single wall tent and the condensation that comes with that for the weight savings. It's going to be someone that's more into wild camping than camping in designated campsites here in the UK. It's going to be a hiker who wants to walk a lot of miles. They're going to be spending a lot of nights in this tent, and they want something that's very quick and easy to set up. I haven't measured this tent, but I'm 5'7" and it fits me perfectly, but I really don't think that this tent is very good for someone who's over 6 foot, maybe 6'2", if you want to fit your pack in there comfortably. Other tents out there on the market that are similar to the Solplex are probably the Lanshan range of tents. I think there's the Lanshan 1 and the Lanshan 2. They're getting very popular. I see a lot of backpackers out here in the UK using those tents, and quite common out there, and they're also a bit cheaper than this tent, but I don't think they're made of the same materials, and I don't think they're as strong. There's obviously the Plexamid, but I've talked about that, and I personally don't think I'd go for that tent. Hyperlight Mountain Gear, they also make some tents which are kind of like a TP shape there, but they're made out of DCF and they're very well designed, but they are incredibly expensive. I think onwards and upwards of $600. The Lanshan tent, however, doesn't come seam sealed as standard, but the Solplex and all of Zpacks tents do. One thing that I almost forgot to mention is that during the setup I use what's called a Poly-cryo ground sheet. They're very cheap and very easy to find on Amazon. I will put a link in the description to it. It's basically an ultralight, really thin sheet of plastic, and it's actually used for laminating windows, and you kind of use a heat gun to shrink it to the window and protect the glass, but it actually works as an incredibly cheap solution to a ground sheet. Even though Dyneema composite fabric is a very strong material, I just like to have that added layer of protection, so if I put it on the ground, something like a pine needle's not going to get in it, any sticks or any twigs or anything, like if there's any glass on the floor, I don't know. You just don't want something really pokey coming up and popping like your Neo Air or something like that. So the ground sheet really works well for that. Another solid bit of advice that I will give you about this tent is that after you've set it up, make sure that you close that rainbow door, because on my first night of the South Downs Way, after I tested it, I actually left the rainbow door open and all of the bugs flew in, and I spent the best part of about half an hour trying to get the bugs out. So I don't think that's a big problem with a double walled tent, because you'll probably end up closing up all of the bug net when you finish, but this one's very easy to forget because it is a single walled tent. Another thing to note about a tent with the bathtub is if you're setting it up in really high grass, then it can actually raise up the corners of the bathtub, and it makes it a little bit easier for rain and things to get in. Another thing about this tent is you have to have the poles at a very slight angle, so it makes it a little bit thinner at the bottom so that the roof can actually be pointing away from each other. But I haven't really found it that much of an issue, and I haven't actually rolled over onto one of the poles yet. If you set this tent up a little bit skew, it doesn't really matter, but you will notice that the poles actually have a little bit of a bend in them. But yeah, like that's just a bit of a given. When you practice setting this tent up, you will get a lot better at it. Overall, my favorite thing about this tent is obviously the weight at 413 grams. It's pretty much next to nothing. The only problem that I really don't like is the condensation, but I'm willing to sacrifice that for the weight saving. It comes in this really neat and tidy little DCF stuff sack, which is more than big enough to fit it in, so when you're packing it up and you folded it all away, it's very easy to put back into the stuff sack. So yeah, an overview of those drawbacks, a few little leaks and very flappy in a rainstorm, but apart from that, for a single wall tent, I think it's held up incredibly well. Okay, campfire question. Do you own a Zpacks Solplex? If you do, let the trail hunter community know in the comments section below. How have you got on with it? And if you were to switch out to another Zpacks tent, would it be the Plexamid, which is their new single pole, single person tent, or would you switch to the duplex just because you love this design so much? Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you found it useful. Thumbs if you liked it, subs if you loved it, and I'll see you in the next one.